Welcome back to Getting Down to Business. On today's episode, we are examining a dentist's first year navigating practice ownership. As we've discussed in previous episodes, dental school is structured to teach on subjects related to patient care, not on how to be the CEO of your business. Many dentists may feel overwhelmed stepping into the role of business owner the first year, so it's important to have a strategy in place to help with things like managing finances, your staff, marketing, and not lose your sanity while trying to do all of that. So let's take a deeper dive into how to navigate your first year owning a dental practice.
So how does one prepare for ownership?
It's always good to do your due diligence so that you kind of know what you're getting into. You know what the client base looks or the patient base looks like. You know what their patient files look like. You know what technology that you're going to be using. You know the revenue that's coming in, the procedures that you're doing. You're going to know all of those things going into purchasing the practice. Now, once you purchase the practice, there's a whole lot of other things that happen. You know, now you're on the hook for all of the bills that come in and the payroll and your staff coming to you with this, that, and the other, the schedule. I don't know if there's a level of preparedness before you purchase a practice for those types of things.
How important would you say it is to understand the local market itself? Does that play a role in, we're here in New Mexico. Is there a big difference between the market in New Mexico and Texas, for example?
I don't think so. I would agree with Kelly. I mean, you're just going to be prepared to step into the unknown. Practicing dentistry, or for that matter, any small business, there's you're a tradesman in what you do. You went to school to learn something. You didn't go to school to learn how to be a business owner. I think you only learn that on the job, and it's a long journey. It's probably one of the most rewarding, but it's also very challenging always. It never stops being hard. But I think the reward of being a business owner long term far exceeds being an employee for somebody else. Norton's book, he's got a chapter on being the CEO, being the CFO, right? CEO, Chief Executive Officer, CFO, Chief Financial Officer. So Chief Executive Officer, know all our operations, know everything that everybody else does. Not to be as good as they are to do their job, but know what it is they do and know what you're relying on them for doing. CFO, you're not going to be a experienced CPA or tax practitioner or strategist on the finance side by reading that chapter. But there's a lot you need to know that other people around you who are in that role have got you covered. And then there's the HR director or chief of human resources. Everything that goes into managing people, that's hard on its own, and you only learn that over time. Right? And CIO, Chief Information Officer, what do you need to know about your computer system? So there's a ton of stuff that you need to know about running a business beyond just being a doctor of dentistry. And you're not going to get that by, quite frankly, reading a book. You're only going to get that by doing it and learning it over time.
And hopefully not doing it alone, right? Hopefully having people around you to mentor you and to help take some of that burden off of your shoulders.
Yeah, and I would say from that perspective, whether or not you do it year one, and whatever happens, if you're buying a practice and there's good positive dialogue between you and the selling doc, that practice may be one that had a coach or a consultant as part of its practice. And what I find more often, especially right now as I'm doing mid-year reviews for clients, those that used and have invested in a coach generally do much better than those that do not. And that coach kind of fills in all those little spaces, that I talked about, the HR components, the reward components, the building the system components, all those things you don't know as a general dentist, they do. And how they can help orchestrate that together between you and your team to make sure you turn the chairs timely, to make sure you fill the schedule smartly, to make sure you have goals. Using somebody like that helps you from an operational perspective, can help you if you're willing to be coached and you're willing to accept, as is your team is, to be mentored and coached, you can do incredibly well for what we do from a tax planning, tax strategy, and just running the numbers and crunching the numbers. Yeah, you need somebody who's good at that stuff as well, just to help make sure you know you're on track to doing the right things and all the hard work is turning into the numbers the way you expect them to. And when they don't, what questions need to be asked to figure why isn't it not working the way you anticipated it to be.
Great. Rachel, I wanted to ask you a little bit if you could highlight some of the key factors in your valuations. Do you look at things like revenue and as maybe compared to profitability? Do you look at the patient base? Do you look at their growth potential? Could you touch on maybe some things I missed, if anything?
I think the most important thing is profitability. We like to see that a business has a healthy amount, of profit. If you have, you're near the 30 to 40% profit versus, a dollar, that's pretty significant. I mean, revenue is important, but that revenue, really hitting the bottom line as profit is more important. What you do with that revenue, how you manage that revenue, is very important.
How critical is the role in the first year of managing your finances well? Maybe we could get some tips on how do we secure financing, managing loans, talk about cash flow management. How important is that? Budgeting, things like that.
Yeah, I'd say in a perfect world, which I've yet to be part of, the buyer sits down and we kind of talk about there's an education on really what is the balance sheet and what ends up on the balance sheet, and what is an income statement and what runs through the income statement. If we were able to sit with the doc and or any small business owner for that purpose and say, okay, we did the due diligence, we know what the business has done in the last couple of years. If we roll that out over the next 12 months, what does that look like per month? And okay, if there's a cash number on the revenue side, what is the production you have to do to fill that? And then how does that all cascade through the income statement? Because now you have bills to pay. And unfortunately, more often than not, the last person to get paid is you, the owner. But we want to make sure you do get paid, by the way, right away. But everybody else, everything else, including the bank, get paid ahead of you. So hopefully the cash flow is there. So how much cash are we starting with in the bank? How much are we adding to it for the month? And how much is coming out of it in the month? And what is that rhythm of cash flow? What comes in, what goes out? What comes in, what goes out? Is it consistent? Is it predictable? Can we plan for it? And if we can, I think in a perfect world, a new owner should start day one saying, I want to understand the rhythms of my cash flow and how does cash come in? What am I doing from a production perspective? And how is my team helping me bill and follow up so that cash flow stays consistent to cover my biweekly and daily and monthly obligations? And what are those on a daily basis? What are those on a biweekly basis, like payroll versus my utility bill versus my debt service payments that come in once a month? How does all that from a timing perspective work? And will I always make sure there's enough cash at the end of every month? And then, of course, in other words, the beginning of the next month to begin to cover those expenses again. And so, setting up a cash flow or a forecasting model would be perfect.
We do try to build in, like, I don't know if you'd call it like a safeguard for covering those expenses, not just the operating expenses, required to continue operation of the business, but also to be able to pay yourself because you have to survive. You probably have student loan debt and You probably live somewhere that requires, rent or mortgage payment or something, you have to survive yourself. And then also you have, maybe if the seller didn't still owe anything for their business, you have all the operating expenses plus this
Yeah.
note, that you have to make on the purchase of the business itself. And when we value, we build in, in our reasonability that you have to pay the dentist, whether they're an owner operator dentist or, an associate, we pay them a market rate, a percentage of production. We build that in to make sure that we're covering the cost of a dentist. And then we also make sure in our reasonability that you have free cash flow to cover your note payment. So whether or not we follow up, 6 months or 8 months or a year later, we definitely built that in the front, right? Like in theory, it should work.
Unfortunately, what happens on a lot of these situations is the folks borrow what's called working capital loan as well. They borrow additional cash. So they're not really paying attention to how money is going out, and money is there because I've borrowed additional money to run operations, and I may not pay attention to how I'm using that money. I just know that there's cash available. I am just managing from, and this is the worst thing, quite frankly, that any small business can do, but it happens way too often. I'm just managing from what cash is in my bank. And if I only have $5,000, I'm not going to pay my my supply bill today because hopefully tomorrow there's more cash that comes in. But if tomorrow I have payroll and I only have $5,000 today, I may not be sleeping very well tonight, trying to stress out about, not trying to, but stressing out about how I'm going to make payroll tomorrow. Somewhere along the way, we should be talking about that profit first strategy and getting people back to basics of fundamental planning and fundamental,
Right.
Josh used the right word, financial management, to really understand your numbers on a month-to-month basis, so you don't get into that position where you're spending outside what the business should allow. The unfortunate thing is the bank doesn't care if you have a need to live on a $200,000 salary. They're going to get paid first, and if there's only $150,000 left for you, the bank will still see that as being okay. But now that you have this larger debt service, you may only be able to pull out 150 for you, not the 200 that we thought was reasonable. And then that makes things really tight for you going forward until you get ahead of that debt service.
Yeah, the bank doesn't care that you're going to live on ramen for however long.
That's right. Yeah. Nor do we believe that you should go to Ruth's Chris every week either, but there
Right.
should be a reasonable happy medium. And it
Right.
isn't ramen all the time, and it isn't Ruth's Chris all the time, but somewhere along the way that there should be a reasonable compensation for what you do. And I think that's sometimes where we do see where somebody can get themselves in trouble when they overpay and there's a substantially higher debt service payment than we would have thought reasonable. And then I really think under those circumstances, you got to then pay extra special attention to what the practice does going forward, because there is no margin for error.
Let's talk about building a team. How important is building a team for the first year of practice management? How important is your staff? Are they just, people that you dismiss, or are they people that you unite with? If you take over a practice, you probably don't want to have to run out and hire a bunch of new staff, right?
Of course not. In any service business, your team is likely as important, if not more important than you. Why do patients keep coming back to the same practice when the doc retires and the new person comes over? They're used to their hygienist, they're used to their office manager, they're used to their dental assistant. All those folks know the patient's name and ask about the kids when they show. It's the new kid that's got to learn all that stuff. But usually by the time you see the dentist, you're already mouth open and stuff sucking out of you. You can't have a good conversation. But you love your hygienist and you always go back to your hygienist. You hopefully have a nice working relationship with the not that you need a nice working relationship, but hopefully your office manager is one that greets you and smiles and at least cares about who you are as a person. And those are the reasons. That's the goodwill. That's the stuff why patients keep coming back. Certainly a good doc and a good bedside manner is important, but your team is vital to those patients coming back. If you turn over everything in that first 6 months, yeah, you may still get patients to come back because they're just used to coming to your office, but you may have a significant loss of patients if there's no other connections to the practice anymore. But the team is vital, and if they're on board, they're going to make sure they're keeping your schedule full. They're going to make sure they're collecting on that AR. They're going to make sure the patients are happy. They're going to make sure they get those patients out of that chair in 45 to 50 minutes so it's ready for the next patient.
Yeah, not only are they the face of your business, even more so than you are, and they maintain those patient relationships, but also they are your trained workforce. They know the processes and procedures of how that office runs better than you do. So, like, I hate to say that's what you paid for, but that is part of what you paid for. And if you don't, if you can't hold on to, maintain, grow a relationship with the staff that, is part of the practice purchase, then you're losing out on that. You're going to set yourself up to start off, a little bit even more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, that's a lot of what you pay for, right? When we go through
Yeah.
a calculation, the goodwill, if we don't want to get into the weeds of technical definitions, but part of goodwill is the things you can't identify that are part of a business. Now, you can't identify them because you can't touch and feel them. But typically, when we're done with the valuation and there's an actual allocation of purchase price, it's that we come up with an agreement that you are buying some physical equipment, chairs, computers, furniture, a CEREC machine, a milling machine, whatever it may be, an X-ray machine, a CBCT, and you can touch and feel all those physical assets. But then everything else you're paying for is called goodwill, and goodwill has a variety of definitions. One of which is an in place, well-trained workforce. And when we do our valuations, we're trying to determine what that goodwill value is. And a lot of that comes from consistency in revenue, the importance of the significance of a profit, and do we see that as well over time increasing? And those are marks of a good practice and a good team. And the better those revenue numbers are and increasing, and the better the profit is and increasing, the more we're willing to value that practice, because you could pay more for a better performing practice that way. And in theory, that's because of the people and their training and the systems in place.
Let's move on to the next segment. So I'm actually kind of curious. Obviously, I could share my insights on initial marketing efforts and the effective strategies, but I am curious what you all have seen for new dentists entering practices their first year, what sort of marketing they did, how they acquired new patients.
Most of the practices that we do valuations on, we do send them a questionnaire and we ask them what are their marketing strategies. There's a small number of them that actually have, paid SEO websites, and maybe they have a campaign management system that they send out mailers, or they use that Valpak. Most of them, almost all of them, have referral programs. Of course, they have the Google reviews. A lot of times they get patients that way, where if they have, a lot of positive Google reviews, they will probably, the new patient base will be a little bit more than somebody that doesn't have those types of reviews. But most of them are referrals, and they have referral programs, and they give prizes and things like that to employees that refer, or even patients that refer. And they have really good programs put together. And then there's other practices that have referral programs that aren't really managed and put together. So from my perspective of what I've seen, I think that a well-managed referral program is helpful for a dentist starting out in the new practice. Something that he or she could track. Well, you can talk about yours too.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. The SEO is pretty big. Also education. When people are looking for services, or they don't even know what they need, but they find out later, having a website that's focused around education of specific topics, specific procedures, that's also going to help your SEO. Obviously, you talked about mailing out coupons. Advertising is good. It's very much about advertising is basically just telling people you want them to buy from you. A dentist might consider sponsoring. That can go beyond the typical advertising message of buy from me. It suggests that you care if you're sponsoring, children's baseball, or, could even be a local publication or something. Sponsorships could be powerful. But I think, it really starts with having a good website with, solid reviews on Google and optimizing keywords to rank on the first page. And, not everybody's doing that. Some people just don't think it's important. And I don't know. I don't know what to tell them, but showing up on Google is very important. Advertising across different social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. You could even try video advertising on YouTube, or running different video campaigns on Facebook as well. I think the most important thing is just getting yourself out there so that people start to associate your brand with your face or your logo or whatever. Just getting into the top of mind of people's awareness is going to be a great step forward. Well, let's just kind of wrap this up. We'll talk about one more point, and if Eric's got to go, it looks like he's going to hop off the call. We appreciate him for being here. I just want to talk about work-life balance and personal growth for a minute, for these new owners.
I think,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, as an entrepreneur in your first year and as a dental practice owner, it's going to be really hard to have work-life balance.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would expect, being a new business owner in any industry,
Yeah.
the first year, you are probably going to feel like you're doing your best to tread water, and you really might not be above the water,
Yeah.
because it's not only working in the business, but having to manage the business and run the business and do all the things that are probably, you do after hours. I
So
think,
let's just put this into perspective. My daughter bought a business, and she bought a business. It wasn't a dental practice, but she bought a business in 2021. And her and I have a very close relationship, and she calls me on the daily about everything under the sun. As soon as she bought a business in 2021, she was calling me at 10 o'clock at night about how she registers for her license and this, and her license for that, and her city license, and where does she log in for this, and how does she get this, and what bank account. I mean, that's all we talked about for probably a year. So she slept her business, she drank her business, she ate her business, and she had no friends during that first year because she was really, really trying to establish and make sure that the business was going well. And after that first year, then she kind of tapered off and started into that work-life balance where she could have control over her own schedule and take a day off here or have an admin day here. But really, that first year, if we're still in that concept of the first year, you really have to be dedicated to the business and making sure you have as much knowledge about it as you can, and make sure that it's running very well.
don't expect it to be easy in the first year.
No.
It's not going to. Know that going into it. And I think, just off the top of my head, being as efficient as you can, making the most use of your time. Do things as efficiently as possible. Whether that means scheduling certain time that you do certain things so that you're not in and out, picking up and setting down different tasks that would be a very inefficient way to do it. So scheduling like, okay, I work Monday through Thursday, Friday I only see patients half the day. Friday afternoon is when I do my office stuff, my admin stuff, my, management stuff that I can't do while I'm seeing patients. If I were in that position, I think fear of the unknown is probably greater than fear of things that you do know about. So things like where am I standing, financially, things like that. Understanding how your financial statements work, like Eric talked about. If you go to, at bed at night and you lay awake thinking like, I wonder how I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. If you knew how you were doing, then you wouldn't have to worry about something that might not be a problem at all, So educating yourself so that there is not a fear of the unknown, you understand those things, so you don't have to be worried about them. And then also, I think learning to delegate down. You probably will go into it feeling like I have the entire practice is on my shoulders, and it is, but making sure that you get the most use out of your staff. You have an office manager, you have people that are there to help you run your business, and making sure that you get the most out of them.
The one thing that when you say that about delegating, the one thing that I want to make clear to new practice owners is even if you have an office manager that's been there for 20 years and you're like, I'm just going to give everything to her, she'll know how to manage it, she'll know what to do. I think you really should still know what she's doing. Some dental practice owners trust their office manager 150%, and that's their prerogative to do that. But from a perspective of what I've seen multiple practices in different situations, I think that knowing that the office manager, knowing that you have input and you are looking at these reports and you're looking at your financials and you're looking at what goes into the bank and you're looking at the deposits and you're looking at the payroll, then there's less likelihood of you being taken advantage of by an office manager that may not be on the up and up.
Yeah, I think that's part of what Eric said earlier when it was kind of like all the hats, like CEO, CFO, CIO, you have to know all of the different areas of your business and what each person should be doing. Not that you would do it or you would maybe do it as proficiently as they do, but they need to know that
What
you
they're
know what
doing.
the expectation is of them. They know what the expectation is, and it's how well they perform and meet those expectations. But there's definitely an expectation there.
Yeah. Don't let this podcast scare you.
Don't let the podcast scare you. That's true. It's a lot of information all at one time. We definitely believe owning your own practice is a smart move. We're, pro of that, even though it's kind of sounds scary. But don't let the podcast scare you.
Yeah.
I think, and this, I think, honestly, it goes into that, not letting the podcast scare you. And I'm going to go back to me saying the fear of the unknown. The more you know, the better position you will be in. That's when you go into it, the more you know about the business that you're purchasing, the more you know about how to run the practice that you now own. And then eventually, the more you know about how to prepare yourself, and get an exit strategy. Like it's always the more you know.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. We really hope you enjoyed and learned something new. If you are a dentist and you'd like to learn some more information about the Hindley Burgmaier Group, check out our website, www.hindleyburgmeiergroup.com. All this stuff is going to be down in the description, and we would love to see if we could have a conversation with you about either getting a valuation or a due diligence, or just setting up a time to talk and getting to know one another. Please consider subscribing to our channel, click the notification bell, give us a like, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you, and we will see you on the next episode of Getting Down to Business.